Thing I did want to add is I was able to attend an Emmaus retreat the fall here in Gaithersburg, and I was so grateful for the day to be able to spend with other people who are living in immense grief. So I'm grateful for this community. I am sorry for why we're all gathered here tonight, but I do feel immensely blessed and honored to be here with you all this evening. So thank you, Patrice, for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. I do have some photos I'd like to share as I speak. I hope it's not too distracting, but just to give you a visual alongside my story. So the first photo I begin with are photos that I took in the Sonoran Desert in Tucson. In the barren, dry desert, these cacti still manage a beautiful blossom. So we too can feel desolate as the desert, and through the thorns and heartbreak, we also can find beauty in the pain. We can find small moments of joy, and we can learn to live in gratitude and in grief. So before I get into the details of the story of my passing of my daughters, I would like to give a little background of how I was raised. I was raised in a Mexican-Italian family in upstate New York, and some of my grandparents and great-grandparents came directly over from Italy. So for generations, we have been Catholic in my family. I grew up with 4 siblings, and my parents raised us to honor those who have died, support those that are left behind here on earth, and appreciate the life that we've been given. We would often attend my great aunts and uncles' visitations or funeral masses. We'd go to the cemetery. And from a very young age, I was introduced to death. And for that foundation, I was extremely grateful. It wasn't uncommon for my parents to pay their respects for coworkers or neighbors or acquaintances or family and friends who had passed away. I remember numerous times my parents running us all into a funeral home to drop off a card or say a prayer by the deceased at their wake or visitation, or even take a meal to a family. It was commonplace for me to experience the reality of death, and I didn't know that others didn't have that same experience until I was much older. I was introduced to death as a part of life at a very young age. My mother's dad, my maternal grandfather, had passed away when my mother was only 11, and he left behind my grandmother and 6 kids. I only knew him through stories my mother would tell me and from photos. And when I was only 3, one of my uncles, my mother's brother, passed away. And even as a 3-year-old, I can still remember my uncle in his final days of life. I remember visiting him in the hospital. My mother took numerous trips while she was pregnant with me and my 2 sisters at the time from New York to Arizona to visit her brother before he passed. I didn't realize it at the time, but the weight of grief was extremely intertwined in how I was mothered and parented. My mother was all too familiar with the effects of grief. The closest death for me growing up was my grandfather, who passed away when I was about 12 years old. This was my paternal grandfather, my dad's dad. I was in middle school and he hadn't been sick very long, but declined rapidly towards the end. And we visited my grandfather multiple times in the hospital while he was in hospice care at home as well in his final days. It was just a few days after he passed, and I was pulled into the counselor's office at school. And I remember the counselor asking me, "Well, what's your favorite memory of your grandfather?" I remember being unable to answer that question, first because they spoke in the past tense, and second, because my understanding of death was that he was no longer here on earth, but he was very much alive in heaven. I hadn't yet spoken of him in the past, as he was still very much present to me. I still talked to him, I still heard his voice, I could still hear his Italian accent, and I still knew his smile. I still felt his hugs, and his lectures replayed in my head. I did feel the weight of heaviness and grief for the first time. It was a pain that pierced my heart, but it was then that I had a fuller understanding of the communion of saints. I understood that we, the church, are all connected. Us, the faithful on earth, those souls in purgatory, and the saints that had entered the kingdom of heaven. Although I had presumed to know many others that had entered purgatory and potentially heaven, my nono, my grandfather, was the first that I had an actual relationship. And as a young Catholic kid, it was exciting for me to know someone that was in heaven, someone I could pray to and talk to and ask for help or intercessions. So I was raised with death as a normal part of life. I was the one that went to play in the basement and had to run back upstairs to tell everyone Chad, our bunny, had died. Many pets, fish, gerbils, guinea pigs, dogs, lived and died with our family throughout the years. And when we left the frogs in the water bucket of our backyard too long, they wouldn't live, and we would bury them in our lawn in the backyard. As our pets passed away, we brought them to the back of the church grounds and buried them peacefully. Ever since I can remember, we went to funerals of family members, and life would pause when someone passed away, and we'd pack up and drive and make the trip for the funeral. We visited cemeteries, we brought flowers, and we said prayers. I was surrounded by it. I didn't know other people weren't raised this way. Death was just a part of my life growing up. My family talked about it. It wasn't covered up. It wasn't taboo. We shared memories of our loved ones who had passed away. We remembered them on their birthdays, and it was acceptable and normal to miss them. I'm so grateful for this experience, and I'm grateful for the opportunity of being surrounded by death and not being shunned from it. I'm grateful that it was acceptable to talk about it and that it wasn't taboo. I was able to see the heartbreak, the fragility of life, the families coming together after a death, and all of this has shaped how I view life and has formed me into the human I am today. And given the cards I've been dealt in my life, I am grateful to raise my kids in a household that embraces death as a part of life. So fast forward now to more recent times. In 2020, my husband and I had 3 children. We were living in New York. My children were 6, 4, and 2, and I was pregnant again with my 4th pregnancy. It wasn't until about 13 weeks that I found out we were having twins. My kids were thrilled. They were just so excited. And I was in shock and disbelief, so very surprised that this was happening. My husband started ordering diapers, and weekly they'd come so we could stock up. We bought 2 bassinets, we researched car seats, and began the search for a vehicle so we could fit everyone in. The kids sang to the babies, felt the babies move inside of me, and talked to them, and they even started a list of names that they liked. They carried baby dolls around, pretending to be carrying their new siblings that were on their way. After 5 months of a healthy, no issue pregnancy, I ended up going into labor prematurely, and I was in and out of a few hospital ERs for a few days before I was put on bed rest. But that didn't even last a day. On our final ER visit, we had a Catholic priest come in. He brought us communion, prayed with us, gave us an anointing, and gave my husband a bottle of holy water just in case. I ended up going into labor just a few hours after meeting with him. Our identical twin daughters were born on either side of midnight on September 1st and 2nd in 2020. We didn't know their gender until they were born. My husband and I hadn't even picked names yet. Both were girls and both were born alive. The hospital where we were at does not support or assist babies that are born prior to the age of 23 weeks. I didn't know that going into labor. I didn't know that they'd be handed to me to die in my arms. Maybe I was the only one in the room that didn't realize what was actually happening. Brent, my husband, was able to baptize both of the babies. He came up with their names, Mary and Elizabeth, and we spent a few short hours with them. The hospital staff didn't seem to know what to do or how to respond, so we asked a nurse to take some pictures. We asked for a placenta print, we asked for footprints, and then we said goodbye. I was released just 15 hours after getting to the hospital with this discharge paperwork in my hand. My husband had a work meeting on the way home, so as we drove home, I listened to that, and I couldn't believe all of this. It just had unfolded the way that it did, and that this was now my new life. I sat in silence on the drive home. If that wasn't all devastating enough, I then had to go home and tell my 3 living children that I was no longer pregnant and that their baby sisters were born, but already died. That day, I left the hospital and I was connected with one of my sisters, with a woman named Cherokee from Tucson, Arizona. She was a bereavement advocate for 30 years and had journeyed with families in similar situations as mine. Connecting with her that day was truly transformative to the days following. My husband was barely allowed at the hospital, and siblings were not welcome at the hospital at all since it was COVID in New York State. On our behalf, Cherokee called the hospital morgue and spoke to the nurse and negotiated our wishes. Through her connections, she found a funeral home that viewed the babies as children of God, as our daughters that died too soon. So she found us a Catholic funeral home in the next town over. She walked with us, guided us, advocated for us, and during a time of shock and confusion, The tears and all of the tears, we found hope, and with her help, we would be listened to. Some of our questions would be answered, and we could work to build memories and a beautiful resting place for our baby girls. She presented to us the idea that we bring our baby girls home so that our 3 living children have the chance to meet their sisters prior to their cremation and interment. She helped us coordinate this request with the funeral home. So 4 days after they were born, they came home to be with us all together for the first and only time as a family. My children were excited to meet and hold and love on their baby sisters. They talked to them and sang to them and held them and kissed them. They surrounded them with flowers, anointed them with rose oil and holy water, and they wrapped them in blankets. We had music playing and rose oil being diffused, and I was able to hold my girls once again, rock them in the rocking chair, and lay them in their bassinet. I was calm and I was relaxed, and it was very comforting and healing for my mama heart. My mother was also there to meet her granddaughters and hold them while they were with us at our house. We had a dear photographer friend join us and be with us during that time to capture the heartbreaking photos of our family. The kids still remember that day, and it's not too often I look at any of those photos as they're just too heart-wrenching and devastating to me, but we still speak of that day when we remember the girls. It was the first time I felt a moment of joy amidst the devastation. I sat by the window with my daughters in their bassinet, and my 3 living children gathered around. They were all smiling and laughing and so grateful they could meet their sisters for just a few short hours. Tears were in my eyes, and few words came out as I was so choked up, but I felt the warmth of the sun, the warmth of God, and it was the first time that I felt that I could let the light in my overwhelming shadow of darkness that I was living in. I knew I needed to find opportunities to open my heart and let the light in again. My older 2 are boys, and they had asked a few days after the girls were born why we didn't have middle names for them. And the truth was, my husband and I were so overwhelmed at finding first names, let alone more names. So our boys took it upon themselves to name their sisters' middle names. I thought it was a cute gesture, but I didn't realize that those names would then be put on everything in the weeks and months to come. My oldest son chose Rose for Mary's middle name. One of my sisters had sent beautiful pink roses, a bouquet of flowers, and the pink roses were so pungent, so they smelled heavenly to him. So Mary was named Mary Rose. My second son chose Leia for Elizabeth. She was named Elizabeth Leia after Princess Leia Organa from Star Wars. I felt in those small ways they too were involved and they could have a relationship with their sisters. 2 weeks after they were born, we had them cremated and we did a funeral at the United States Military Academy at the West Point Chapel, which is where we were living at the time, and the girls were placed to rest in a columbarium at the West Point Cemetery. It was a place we had taken the kids many times before. They knew that it was hallowed in sacred ground. Custer's buried there, Margaret Corbin, many astronauts, numerous soldiers and service members, 18 Medal of Honor recipients. My husband had classmates and friends that died in Afghanistan, buried there that we visited frequently. What I had never noticed before, until after I started visiting the cemetery daily, was the amount of babies and children and young adults of the service members. There are hundreds. I then had a different appreciation for the families that had served. Not only did they spend their lives in service to their country, but numerous service members had also buried their babies or children that had passed away. I was not alone. For months straight, I visited the cemetery daily. As a military family, we knew we were moving again in the summer, so I wanted to visit the cemetery as often as I could while we lived walking distance away. Most of the time, it was just me and my 2-year-old daughter. We would bring flowers. Sometimes my sons would go with me, and they'd bring pieces of artwork to share them with their sisters. My daughter would talk to the girls in the cemetery. We would bring bubbles to blow or books to read. I tried to find small ways to live in gratitude while my heart was so heavy and my days were consumed with grieving. I was also learning to parent my living children and needing to find ways to parent my babies that had passed away. I wanted to find ways to connect with them and to feel their presence too. I knew one of the ways I could do this was to be united with them again in Mass. So I paid a little bit more closer attention at Mass. I sang the Holy, Holy, Holy louder than I had ever sung it before, and I appreciated the Eucharist differently. I learned the thin veil between heaven and earth was at the Mass, and I wanted to surround myself in God's divine love and to feel that warmth as much as I could. Just 8 months after our identical twin daughters, Mary Rose and Elizabeth Leah, died, I was pregnant again. A pregnancy after loss comes with a range of emotions, and this was no exception. But this pregnancy didn't even make it through the first trimester. I found myself devastated all over again, in disbelief that this was happening, and I was heartbroken that I had my hopes up even for a little bit that I'd be bringing another baby home Earthside. I again had to explain to my three living children that another sibling of theirs wasn't coming home, that they were with us again at the funeral home, at the funeral, and at the columbarium in the cemetery. We named this baby Lucia Francisco, and Lucia Francisco's story is often the forgotten one, the name that gets mentioned last or not even mentioned at all, the story that never gets told. We named this baby Lucia Francisco because we didn't know the gender of the baby and because it was born on the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. The children that Mary appeared to were Jacinta, Lucia, and Francisco. What was different about this loss is that I already had an understanding of what to expect. I learned that grief was going to be all consuming. I knew that every shower was going to be filled with tears. I knew that I shouldn't be driving because I was too distracted and disoriented, living in the fog of confusion. I knew that a burner would be left on the stove or the oven would be left on long after I was done cooking. So I learned I had to set timers to remember to shut them off. I knew I would walk into a grocery store with immense forgetfulness and not have any idea what I went there for in the first place, so I wrote lists. I knew that my calendar needed to have every appointment or activity listed because my memory was gone. I knew that I needed to limit my contact with certain people because their words would be triggering or bring on a panic attack. I knew that I could have sudden and intense waves of anxiety, wondering if or when I was going to die, or my husband, or any of my living children. And I knew that if I didn't pause life or slow down, I would not be able to function, living in the mentally overwhelmed state that I was in. I knew that I was going to again feel isolated and alone in my marriage with certain friends or with neighbors because it felt as if no one understood. I knew that intrusive thoughts could become all consuming if I allowed them to, and that the what if questions were not as helpful as my brain thought they would be. I learned that I felt immense emotions of anger and sadness and guilt, and that all these emotions would come and go as quickly as they came. I learned that grief often left me feeling out of control, and that I needed to find ways to be able to put one foot in front of the other on my healing journey. I knew about compounding grief and all of the secondary losses I would be grieving again. I knew that journaling was helpful to me, so I made more time for that. I knew sleep was necessary, so I prioritized my bedtime. I knew physically about the postpartum time period and the toll it takes on your body to so abruptly not be pregnant anymore. So I upped my cooking game with more nourishing and healthier food options. I knew the supporters in my life and I surrounded myself with them. I knew those that were willing to listen to my story and I shared with them. I knew that I needed to invite grief back in order to continue on in my healing journey. I knew that the pain was so deep and the grief was so pronounced because the love for my babies was so great. And I was amazed at all I had learned in just a few short months about grief and how it affected every aspect of my life. But on the outside world, I had also learned how dismissive society could be about death. I had walked into a department store in Texas once with my sister, and a worker welcomed us in, gave us the rundown on the store, and concluded her introduction with, "You'll just die when you see the baby section." I was a bit taken aback by her comment, as if she only knew how closely I lived with death. Would she still have said that? My initial thought was, I don't really want to go there then, if I'll just die when I see the baby section. Thank you very much. I started to think of all the nonchalant phrases or idiomatic expressions that we use in our everyday language. You're killing it. It's to die for. The blue screen of death. You're killing me, Smalls, the famous line from Sandlot. I'm bored to death. I'm scared to death. Cross my heart and hope to die. You'll be the death of me. I'm tickled to death. Not to mention all the euphemisms in our language that beat around the bush in regards to death. Kicking the bucket, do not pass go, croaked, meet your maker, 6 feet under, bought the farm, pushing up daisies. Why can we describe our ice cream as to die for, or ignore the actual words by describing death in idioms, but not actually say the word? We hear these sayings or phrases daily, so casually in our society, but when death really happens, people find themselves uncomfortable, at a loss of words, avoiding the topic, especially when it comes to babies dying, children dying, or young adults dying. Maybe when babies or young people die, it's too hard for us to wrap our heads around. Maybe it's too heartbreaking. It's an out of order death. It's unexpected, or it's hard to admit that it happens. Whatever the case, I quickly learned that I needed to talk about my babies. Some of us still wanted to talk about our children that have died. I have been told it's macabre to talk about dead babies. I've been told that my living children will think I love our babies more than them if I talk about my dead children too much. I've also been told it would be easier on everyone if we just moved on from this. The quicker, the better. Instead, I would challenge us as a society to move the conversation in another direction. How can talking about death help us more fully live our life? How can talking about our children create a sibling bond with any siblings left here between heaven and earth? How can talking about death make us appreciate the life we've been given? How can talking about our children be a testament of supporting life at all stages from conception to natural death? How can talking about death give us something to look forward to when we pass from this earth? How can talking about our children be a balm to our broken hearts? All of us who have experienced death all too closely can be advocates to others. Let's all together shift the conversation and allow death to be a normal part of life. From that second experience of loss, I knew then and now I am even more convinced that every loss, no matter the length of pregnancy or the length of life earthside, deserves to be acknowledged and grieved. I have often heard the words from women, well, I was only blank weeks along, but all losses, no matter the length, are worthy of grieving. All deaths, no matter the explained reasons or unexplained reasons, are worthy of grieving. My babies were carried and loved and are continually loved. I strive to change my language in hopes that others too acknowledge the depth of love that I had for this precious children of mine. Mary, Elizabeth, and Lucia Francisco are counted by their siblings in the sibling count. We celebrate their birthdays, even the short lives that they lived. We wonder what life would have been if they stayed longer, and we find ourselves finding ways to connect with the other side in an attempt to feel their presence. By paying closer attention to the wind or the sky or the butterflies and all of God's beauty that surrounds us, we often pause to reflect and appreciate that. We visit the cemetery and honor the sacred space where our babies were laid to rest. We sit in the sunlight and feel the warmth of God's hands on our back, and we are in awe of the beauty that rainbows and sunsets make, and we wonder what it looks like from the girl's perspective up above. We live in Maryland now, and we usually only make it to New York about twice a year to visit the cemetery. On our most recent visit, we spent our afternoons picnicking at the cemetery. The kids collected pine cones and we covered them with peanut butter and birdseed and laid them around the cemetery. We went back in the evening after dark one night and brought a mini fire pit and roasted marshmallows and did s'mores with the kids. We took photos and said prayers and walked around the cemetery, acknowledging all of the babies and children and young adults whose lives ended too soon. This is very healing to me, knowing that our children will know the importance of their lives here on earth as they reflect on the death of others, including their siblings. We went on to have one more daughter who is now 2.5. Her middle name is Joy, chosen by her bigger siblings. She has not nor ever replaced our babies that have died, but she has been a healing blessing to my living children as they now have a tangible place to give their overflowing love. We are in a season now as Church of Memento Mori, remember your death. Hallowtide carries such wisdom in that we remember our own death and we pray for the departed and we celebrate all of the saints in heaven. Death should not be taboo. It should be in the forefront of our minds. We are so blessed as Catholics to have the communion of saints. In our family, we do an altar of remembrance beginning on Dia de los Muertos, and we leave it up for the entire month of November. It has photos of family members that have died. It gives us the opportunity to visually see their photos and spend some extra time praying and sharing stories about them so our children can know their relatives. Around the holidays, we also light candles with the names of my daughters, and they have them with us at the table. This is a tangible way for us to show how we can honor and respect the dead. But no matter how many children we have, our family will never feel complete, as they will always feel like we are missing someone. One of my most favorite times in the liturgical season is the Triduum. After Lent, during Holy Week, I have learned that we can't know the joy of the resurrection without the depths of the hole that is felt on Good Friday. We need to experience death and have the waiting period of grief and angst. During this time, we break open ourselves, we dive into grief, and we know the depths of love we have. And then we can experience the profound meaning that surrounds the resurrection. We are a crucified people, but we also are a risen people. And we need to know death in order to understand and appreciate the value of life. I have also clung to Mary in my most devastating moments and walked with her in reflection as she watched her son Jesus die. When I want to enter more fully into my grief, I allow my thoughts to drift to the steps that Mary had to take on Jesus's final day as he walked towards his crucifixion. Eileen Tully wrote a book titled Praying with Our Lady of Sorrows, Meditations for Grieving Mothers, that has been very helpful to me on my journey. When I want to enter more fully into my grief, some questions that I find myself pondering are, and looking deeper into my soul and finding practical ways to support myself are, how have I incorporated grief and gratitude into my life? How is God working in my life despite the feeling of despair? What signs are there in my life that healing is happening? How can I be present to my pain? And how can I allow God to be present in my pain? To finalize my sharing tonight, I'd like to end with some lessons I've learned in grief. I've learned that grief is a normal human process, and it's a very necessary process. It should be welcomed rather than suppressed or avoided. Allowing myself to feel the full spectrum of the range of emotions was and is crucial for my healing journey. I have learned to have to be patient with myself in this process. It's a slow and ongoing process that takes time. Grief is unpredictable and inconsistent and can be a roller coaster of emotions. I've also learned that grief is as unique as every individual. It's a personal journey, and everyone experiences grief differently. What works for one of us may not work for another one. I learned that I must honor my own grieving process without comparison to others, and that I am on my own timeline. It's not linear either. And being on my own journey with my own timeline allows me to be more authentic to my personal experience and meet my needs as they arise. Grief will affect every aspect of your life. This was a hard lesson for me to learn. I wanted to compartmentalize it, to access it when I only had the time or the energy, but I quickly learned it affected my physical body, my mental state, my emotional being, and my spirituality. It is intertwined with every aspect of our life. Surrounding myself and sharing my story and hearing other stories of loss makes me feel less alone. Connecting with others who are actively grieving, I feel understood. I feel like they just get it. And even in our pain, we can still offer support and comfort to others. I have also learned to accept help from others and lean on others who are willing to offer support. At the same time, I also feel like we can show up differently for others who are suffering. I know the depths of loss and despair, and if I can be a listening ear to someone, or cook a meal for them, or write a note letting them know I'm thinking about them, I take every opportunity I can to do those small gestures for others. I also learned that I needed to prioritize my self-care, true, genuine, authentic self-care, adequate sleep, choosing healthier food options, physical activities, and finding brief moments of joy has been essential to my overall well-being. Grief has challenged me in my depth to forgive. I have learned more deeply about forgiveness, forgiving myself for the decisions that I had made or didn't make, the guilt and blame that arose, forgiving others who were with me, The evening the girls were born at the hospital, the lack of compassion and lack of humanity they held. I have also had to forgive others who told us to move on or get over it or let it go. I'd had to forgive family members that didn't come in for the girls' funeral or won't even mention the girls' names or won't acknowledge that my living children have siblings in heaven. Forgiving them has been an unexpected lesson interwoven with grief that I didn't know was going to be a part of this process. I would rather experience the pain and process of forgiveness and experience love rather than allowing the resentment to build and destroy me internally. I also don't think we need to find a reason that my babies died. Everything does not happen for a significant reason. But I do feel like I can find meaning in the life that I live because their life here on earth was so short. I feel as if I'm compelled to live my life more fully. I no longer dread birthdays or getting older. I celebrate my living kids' birthdays more fully with more gratitude than I did in the past. And I have a deeper respect and appreciation for life. I also have gained understanding about what's more important in my life, what I want to prioritize and value. And my biggest lesson in grief is that joy can coexist with grief. Finding moments of gratitude has helped me navigate the complexities of loss. I have found joy despite the heaviness of grief that I carry. I have moments of hope and I can feel the light again. As we move into the season of Thanksgiving, I am continually grateful for my journey. I'm grateful for the grief and the depths of love that I was tasked with. And I'm grateful for the moments of joy that I can still feel when I open my heart and let the light in. We can blossom again like the flower on the cactus in the desert. Thank you all.